Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Joshua Free, and we're going to talk about the ancient alien theory and the Anunnaki, and I may be pronouncing that a little wrong. I think I've heard different people pronounce it differently, Anunnaki or Anunnaki. But at any rate, I'm sure that Joshua can get that pronunciation corrected if I am a mistake about it. He's got some 30-odd books about different parts about the ancient astronaut work that he's done over the years. It'd be a long list to go into, but I told him that today we could probably talk about the religious and spiritual aspects of the ancient aliens and the religions that they brought to us and what we might have learned from them in a spiritual context, if anything. But real quick, let me get him on the air with us here and let him introduce himself, tell you a little something about himself. Joshua, how are you doing tonight?
Great. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fine, just fine. Been a little stuffed up, but the time of year.
It is, and that's affecting everyone I know here in Colorado also.
Oh, you're in Colorado. I wasn't aware of that.
I am, and everyone seems to have sinus issues right now that I know, so I think it's just going around.
Yeah, it must be. I know I am. But at any rate, I do think it's always a good way to break the ice to have the guest, you already told them your name, but, basically, what was your first interest? How long have you been interested in the ancient astronaut field?
I guess the more realistic or believable end of that, for the sake of tonight, I grew up in the 80s. I'm almost 30 years old. I grew up in the 80s. I was enamored by a lot of the media and culture at that time. I was constantly absorbing, there's the Dark Crystal and the Labyrinth and all these mystical kind of elements, and so that's what I remember from childhood. I was raised Catholic, and so there was a lot of religious indoctrination and whatnot as well, and spirituality into, thinking kind of outside the box. I attended Catholic school, was an altar boy, actually considered going into the priesthood very seriously, and as I was coming of age, I was about 12, 13 years old, a lot of the things that I was looking into and exploring it more deeply was pointing me in other directions, things outside of what I had been raised into. And, of course, in that kind of a paradigm, it's almost like taboo or forbidden to ask any kind of questions, to look outside of what's strictly been given. And kind of my bedtime story version of the Bible as, we all kind of receive it. And I ended up getting involved in more of the other side of things. I kind of went the other direction, pursued the New Age, metaphysics. I didn't feel that I lost my spirituality, but I felt that for our world there was a greater understanding behind it, and that there was more than what I was being given. And I wasn't satisfied with that. So I ended up getting involved with the New Age and the occult officially when I was 12 years old. And I was actually initiated into a Druid organization. And in even that, I was exposed to a lot of things outside of, what's strictly Celtic paradigm, Druidry or whatnot, just a mythological way of looking at things. That more than just the religion that we're given from perhaps just the monotheistic Judeo-Christian biblical perspective, that there was kind of something behind this that more than just the Druids, but almost all ancient cultures seem to reflect. And, these obviously predate Christianity by thousands of years. And what it really pointed towards was that all the traditions were focused on kind of a sky god religion, if we can call it that, and that they all adopted this belief that the gods were in the heavens and the stars, and that they came down, they entrusted knowledge and civilization to the people. And it seems kind of interesting that every culture would have this as their basis or their religious mysticism. And it's even found within the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's downplayed to what we're offered of it considerably, or in many cases even removed, which has happened over the last several thousand years. So this kind of led me to explore all this at a more academic, kind of intellectual level, because that's kind of what I'm about. And immediately when I started talking to people, talking to other people, friends of mine, even at a very young age, it seemed to attract a lot of interest. And so I started exploring it individually on my own. It, at the same time, kind of made me an outcast from a lot of the groups and organizations that I was involved in at the time, because again, I was constantly looking for something outside of the box. I mean, even within, getting out of the box of the framework I was raised to, it seemed like I was falling into just yet one more enclosure. And it seems that the way the order works in this world, it's almost designed where, anyone who questions is pretty much considered crazy. If you don't,
right,
not accepting it the way it is, then for some reason, you're the one that has the issue. You're not seeing it the way everyone else is. And so, the ancient alien theory, that's kind of a semantic that's become popular now. It's not actually a new idea, but it is a semantic as far as the vocabulary we're using to describe it. That's becoming, more popular to our generations. We're raised on, Star Wars and this kind of science fiction methodology. And it's not to say that it's fake, but what it does is it breaks it down into a way that our generation is going to understand it, just like our ancestors' generations understood it their way, using what they understood of technology, what they understood of mysticism and spirituality. So, I mean, it's like the next evolution of a human understanding of where things came from. And the term alien, I mean, we could apply that to almost anything, depending on what kind of definition you want to apply to that kind of language. And, in some respects, we think about the kind of spaceship extraterrestrial alien that comes from a physical planet or a physical star system that we could see perhaps, and then travels physically, incarnating in physical bodies that we can interact with, all physically the way we would understand it, much like in our world today. There's also the interdimensional, what a lot of people would call interdimensional theories involving alien beings, that it's no different. It's still, we're using the word alien. So whether one's encountering it physically as spaceships, whether one's encountering it in their spiritual traditions as like an angelic experience, or something where you're in a room and something is not there and all of a sudden it is and then it's not, these would all be considered alien by our perspective, because they're not they're not within our framework, they're not within what we understand of reality. So we give to it the name alien. It's a foreign concept to us. So for that reason alone, putting aside even all the historical evidence, all of the anything that we could interpret into it, it's like whether it's a religious or a mystical or even some new scientific anomaly, it's going to appear alien to us, and that just kind of gives it the semantic that it is. Now, to the ancient alien theory, we could credit that if we were to assume, some of those elements, even just a few of them, to be correct, you have civilization sparking up out of nowhere. You have a bunch of, assuming the Anunnaki theory of the development of humans as a slave race or as a worker class for servitude to the gods, to bring them food, to bring them gold, to bring them what they needed to survive a physical existence on Earth, because they weren't going to do the work. Assuming those things, you have these people kind of coming out of this Neanderthal caveman mentality, being quickly upgraded, genetically advanced at an accelerated rate, and going from, hunter-gatherer living in caves wandering about to, they wake up one day and it's cities and it's paved roads and it's blocks and huge skyscrapers and all of these things that appear overnight, it's almost like a culture shock, you know.
Right.
And so even by their semantics, of course, they took a more religious, spiritual perspective behind it. But even their semantics at the time would have been considered alien, because to them, whether they were God, divine or not, they were not of this earth and therefore alien. So, I mean, that applies to almost all, you know, whether it's conventional religious or even the mystical traditions of, you know, that are promoted in the New Age. Any of these kind of quote-unquote otherworldly experiences are all essentially alien in nature just by definition. So it just depends on what facet of it, you know, we're referring to, you know, because now in our kind of, I don't want to say convoluted, but it's definitely become pretty widespread. There's, you know, you have the Greys and you have the Syrians and you have these and that and, you know, all these factions. And so now it's no longer, it's kind of like the situation with Atlantis. You know, at once, you know, we really didn't have an understanding of lost civilizations, and now we have over a dozen that can all almost qualify as Atlantis. It's like, in our case, it's like, you know, as the understanding increases, the possibilities for how we can understand these things is going to increase, and that's really the only way we're going to develop, as far as our understandings of where we came from, you know, why things are the way they are now, and what we can do with this, where we can go with this to, you know, evolve as a species. So.
Yeah, I've often said that the ancient astronaut theory was an important tool to better understanding where we're at today and how we got here today. Because what's happened to us has been...
things from a greater perspective.
Well, I mean, it's been transpiring over millennia. You know, this wasn't an overnight deal.
Right. And even the oldest interpretations of Judeo-Christian tradition really do advocate for that type of understanding. These early forms of, like, Gnostics, the Essenes, and so forth, they were pushed out relatively early in their existence because of the message they were advocating regarding that aspect. You know, there's certain parts of every interpretation of history or every rendering of it that are based on the perspective of the observer who is setting it down. But a lot of the elements that would better understand, help people better understand where this ties into what they're already familiar with in terms of biblical scriptures, it really helps to take that into account, and it's missing from our current versions of it, yet it's
right.
Still their imprint. It's there if people want to look for it. A lot of it has to do with translations. A lot of it has to do with the interpretations of certain words. It's become kind of it's sad to say cliche this early in the game, but it's become almost a cliche example of the biblical Hebrew Elohim in their regards to the creation of humanity, where it's actually translated in Hebrew in a plural, and actually in Hebrew almost a plural feminine form. But it gives people the impression in ours that it's God created man in his image, where in the Hebrew tradition, in the Hebrew version that predates the modern interpretation of it, its meaning, its context is completely different. It's feminine because it's generative, and it's referring to a group of people. And these are, of course, in the Sumerian and Babylonian tablets that predated by thousands of years, of course, the Anunnaki and their creation or upgrade of hominid forms into modern man. And a lot of the scriptures do come almost word for word from ancient tablets, for the reasons that the Hebrew people for a time were actually under the governance of Babylon. There was a time when even Nebuchadnezzar took over the Jerusalem and was going to level the temple and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of kind of dark crevices of ancient history, and for that reason, I mean, for thousands of years, that place has constantly been in discord, probably more than any other place on our globe. and it's just it seems to stay in a state of unrest since it has lost or been fragmented from what it once was, and that seems to almost have originated during Babylonian periods, around what the Hebrew would consider the time of Abraham and so forth. So, with the fragmentations that take place, it renders so many people unable to see the complete picture. There doesn't seem to be enough time in a lifetime most of the time to get to that point. Everyone kind of has this universalistic, politically correct vision that, everyone has a piece of the truth, or all the traditions or religions have some element or part that's correct. And, there is a truth to that, but to work it backwards there's not enough time. And this is what a lot of the modern New Age systems do, unfortunately. There seems to be no lack of knowledge, no lack of books now. I mean, where once, New Age was not, well, it wasn't even a term, but the pursuit of these concepts, even 100, 200 years ago, this was witchcraft, this was evil, it was sorcery, it was devil worship. It's changed now in human consciousness. There's greater acceptance to it, and what it did was open up this influx of information that originally was not so well public.
Right.
It wasn't that it was there, but it wasn't public. And so, kind of like opening the floodgate, you have all of this to deal with at once, and, it's overwhelming. And the chances and probability that you're going to get the Rubik's Cube together in a single lifetime is pretty minuscule, unfortunately. And so that's one of the reasons, like with my work, I've tried to bring it back to the beginning most of the time, the sources of it. A lot of people think that I'm overly obsessed with, Mesopotamia and the Anunnaki, forsaking everything else. Not even realizing that my involvement in, for example, the Druids is what led me down this path. But it's important for the greater understanding to go back to the source and the roots of things, because it's over time and the expansion of the population, it bloomed like a tree. And so, you have all these branches with elements, but it's much easier and coherent to go back to the beginnings and to try and, rather than look at it through, for example, being initiated into some Celtic tradition or being indoctrinated into some, specific branch of Christianity or whatever, rather than look through it with those eyes, with those glasses on, to try and work itself backwards, which is a rigorous task at best. It's much easier to go back to the beginnings to remove all the filters and all the blocks that we have to receiving that knowledge, what I call self-honestly, and then, if necessary, be able to take a look through time and see how it reflects, rather than trying to piece together all these minuscule connections and little pieces of the puzzle, because I think that's been done. I think that method has already, I think that's what we've operated under for so long, and I think, if anything, we've reached almost the limitations of that.
Sounds, it makes sense to me.
So well, it does when, most people are able to stop and just think about it, especially in this day and age. There's so much going on, just in today's world, on the web, and, the population growth and everything that, it's people, when I tell people what I do, they just kind of give me a look of, so what? Because, it's like, how does this apply to my everyday life, and what does this really mean for me? And it can be a little discouraging, but even more than that, it reminds me of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I've, kind of forsaking a normal life because I'm dedicated to not only an organization, but a publishing company and several things that are, this is the main focus, is trying to bring this out to people in a very cohesive way, a way that's accessible, that's able to be understood. It doesn't require joining some faction or being initiated into some organization or membership fees and title ranks and all of that. This should just be a part of everyday life. And people that I've worked with in the past several years, that's kind of the way it is for them. It's not we go about our everyday and then go home. This is what we pretty much are occupied with 24/7. And that's why, like I say, when the people give me the so what look, it's like, oh, maybe I'm still missing, reaching, that understanding with people of how important this is to the reality they wake up to every day, because it affects them, whatever it is they believe about where they came from and why our systems and governments and religious factions are the way they are. It does affect how they interact with reality. It seems kind of humdrum. It seems kind of like it's just this, added element that, we work and we play and we have family and then we deal with our spirituality almost as like an afterthought. But it's actually psychologically, it's how we are interpreting our world. A culture that believes that their creator God scraped up a bunch of dirt and threw them into, the mix of, the chaos of civilization to serve them and whatnot, it's going to affect the consciousness of how they go about their everyday world. Another one that believes that, they were created out of sin and that's basically the main context of their existence, it's going to affect their world as well. The same as any religious belief or dogma. For example, the belief in the devil. It's how one interprets that into their life. It does affect how they go about their life. Do they feel that they're in danger of being manipulated by an evil force? Someone who does believe that is going to behave and think and interact differently than one who doesn't, even if it is not, their salient or surface thought at that moment, because most people don't walk around usually thinking that way. There's some fundamentalists and fanatics, I suppose, that do. But, it goes beyond that. And that's kind of what language, which also language and writing originated in Mesopotamia, that's what that had an effect towards as well, is people interpreting their world through a certain set of eyes. This is something that changes dramatically when we move away from a civilization and a culture that's based on a picture writing where, they are putting something down onto, printed tablets or paintings that's words that stay, perhaps, but it's not a literary tradition. And so, an eagle is basically represented by a picture of an eagle and so forth. It's when it changes to a language, when it changes into writing, all of those words have to take on meaning and context for them to apply as a language, for a person to use it and another person to actually receive it and comprehend its meaning and have it be the same. This is actually a bigger shift or advancement or evolution in human history than a lot of people give it credit for. And it's overlooked quite a bit. We just kind of take it for granted. And in elementary school, we're given this perspective that, there's these Egyptians and they made these hieroglyphics on these walls and, then we have the Greek language and so forth. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's the classical period that most people are still indoctrinated into. Even a decade ago when I was taking classes in ancient history and so forth, it seems like they pretty much start with classical periods, with the Greeks and the Romans, and I think we spent very little bit of time on the Egyptians. And there was some mention of Mesopotamia, you know, the Code of Hammurabi, and there were some ziggurats and so forth, but that was about it. And most people's understanding even today of Mesopotamia and Babylon, or even Egypt for that matter, is that it's interpreted or seen through our traditional biblical perspectives, and usually in a negative light. But most importantly, the cuneiform writing system is what really changed everything. And
that's what Sitchin said.
Well, it really did. It was the original actual writing system. I mean, people have been painting on walls and trying to be artistic for some time, but in the way that I had just described it in terms of the semantics and comprehension of meaning, it was revolutionary. And what it also enabled them to do was actually manipulate the meanings of things. And this is something now that's happened ever since this inception of writing. And this is how history has changed. This is how news is altered. But it's basically getting people to think in terms of language. The people that were existing prior to that were, even before, occupying cities, the nomadic and the hunter-gatherers and so forth, they were envisioning and seeing a reality completely different than we would ever see it today, because we see reality based on our language, our understanding. I mean, especially in the Western world, the first thing we give a kid is, a picture dictionary. It's A is for apple, here's a picture of an apple, here's the letter A, here's the word. And this is how we continue, from that kind of set program, we continue to observe and take on meaning of our world as we age, as we mature through our childhood. And it's not until we come across something that we don't previously have like a folder file for that we're led to question again, or we try to fit it into one of our other prearranged ways of looking at something, one of our other folders. Well, this is just that, or this is just something like that. Or if it really is that anomalous to us, it's just this does not compute and it doesn't exist, and we just, we let it alone.
Guesswork classification.
Right. And so in Mesopotamia in the ancient times, this writing system, it enabled, for the first time, history to be brought into language. And so rather than an oral tradition, rather than people just being focused on survival and just, if you can get along in the world, you gather enough fruit and stay close to the fire, then you'll be alive and you're just fine. Civilization brought a lot of new elements outside of mere survival that people now had time for. The Ice Age had receded, it was warmed up, people were able to take more of an interest in fashion, they were able to have more time in developing their cultures and their arts, and all of these things were kind of tied in to religious systems. And, I mean, we talk about religion today and it's humdrum, everybody's got their own religion and la-di-da, and we try to just be accepting of it. Well, in ancient times, religion was a government institution. I mean, it wasn't just a matter of everyone believes their own thing and we'll just get along. These temples were built towards specific deities, specific sky gods or Anunnaki that had made their presence, that had stationed themselves there. And so everyone, of that city or of that part of the tradition would, angle more of their prayers and their attention and their focus, or which way they stood when they prayed, towards that. And there you have, the inception of religion. And it's interesting to interpret it now as monotheism, because even in Babylon, when that was attempted, it wasn't truly monotheism. Basically, one of the younger generation of Anunnaki, whose time to rule, since it was all cyclic with them, based on what we would call now the zodiac ages, the time of Aries came, and it was his time to rule. And in all of the politics and drama that unfolded with the Anunnaki, because in spite of them, our recollection of the term gods, they, in themselves, these tablets record that they had feuds among themselves regarding how things should be, decisions on how to deal with humanity and so forth. So in the case of Babylon, you have essentially the home of the first writing system, the Marduk, who is the son of Enki, who is the son of Anu. And in most conventional Sumerian religion, Enki's brother, Enlil, is who is basically viewed as supreme. They're called Enlilites. It's the sons and daughters of Enlil that are given all of the attention. In fact, Sumerian-specific pre-Babylonian tablets have no mention of Marduk, who's given so much attention later on. This changes in Babylonian time when Marduk, who brings light to Enki and magic and scientific knowledge, because that is what Enki represented, whereas Enlil was more about order, the function of government systems, hierarchies, and so forth. So in Babylon...
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I was going to mention that we had a question in the chat room, but okay. I wanted to real quick, before I forgot, take the opportunity to let everybody know that your website address, and I have it right here on the page, is www.necrogate.com/WP/. And he's also got some 20 or 30 books. I think it's almost 30 books out there, and I've got the good-sized chunk of them here on the front page. I'm going to move it to the archive tomorrow inside of a little slideshow. If y'all want to just mouse over the pictures at the bottom of the deal, it'll pop up the book cover for you. And, also I wanted to mention for those of you listening at Shoutcast, iTunes, your smartphones or whatever, that the call-in number here is 832-632-7904. And moving on to the question in the chat room, James was asking, because he was curious about what your religion is or your spirituality, because you appear to be so well versed in so many. He was curious if it could be narrowed down to, anything in particular.
That's a difficult question to actually answer. Unfortunately, being so well versed and like you just described, it's required me taking a step outside of adhering to a specific faction or sect. As I said, I was raised Catholic. It's not that I would say I'm still Catholic, but I guess I try to remain outside of a specific set paradigm of things. As I mentioned, I went from that to being initiated into Druidism. But even in saying that, it doesn't mean that I adopted this specifically cultural Celtic paradigm of interpreting the world. What it did was actually what I guess a lot of people would call Gnosticism. It opened this door to looking for revelation and true knowledge, divine wisdom, things directly, rather than looking to an empirical source. The organization that I run is called the Mardukites, and a lot of that is tied into Babylon and basically the literary tradition that started there. But even in saying that, to call Mardukites, a religion, or to say it's my religion, it's easy to do because it seems to fit that description or that way of understanding the world, but it's not meant to be based on, for example, a religious devotion toward Marduk. What it does is go back to the original meaning behind that and how religion was formed. So rather than adopt a specific religious fragment or sect, it allows one to look at all of them and see how it came to be. It it's trying to operate outside of the semantics that systems require to exist. As soon as we put a label on it, it immediately begins to conjure either pre-existing things to mind or be connected to these pre-existing things. Mardukite was a word not really well used prior. It appears in a few books by Zechariah Sitchin describing the factions of Babylon. But as far as our modern understanding, even in the ancient alien world or paradigm, it was not yet really used. And so my reason for adopting it was for that very reason, that it did not already have a lot of organized connotations to it. Of course, it does bring to light of, okay, well, who is Marduk? But I guess it would be the closest thing to me. It's not to say, it's its own religion and this is what I am, but I think it'll validate or help clarify the self-honest truth of people's religious beliefs, wherever they're coming from, whatever background they have with that. A lot of them, though, stem from this, and that actually goes back to what I was going to say earlier, was these original tablets in Babylon, when the cuneiform writing really got popular. It actually created the oldest religious, I would say, collection of knowledge that we have on the planet, and it further influenced all of the rest. The Epic of Creation, which is actually misappropriated as Sumerian, the Enuma Elish, it's one of our most famous archetypal, it's like embedded in consciousness, this story, and it's actually Babylonian. It actually isn't the Sumerian story. It parallels some elements in Sumerian stories regarding the battling of a great dragon to show supremacy over the universe. But as it's given, the 7 tablets of creation, as they're sometimes called, or the 7 days of creation, or so forth, which led to the Judeo-Christian Genesis, it's actually a Babylonian story used to elevate the position of Marduk above the gods. And it describes an ancient primordial dragon that rises from a primeval abyss that eventually gives birth to a race of gods. The gods further reproduce. Several generations are described. And then it says that they grew too noisy. And so there's a plot that Tiamat, this dragon, has to basically destroy her children. The Anunnaki, Anunnaki means those who came from heaven to earth. So, I mean, this is even prior to them coming to earth, but the figures later referred to as Anunnaki, they catch wind of this plot against them and petition Marduk to fight on their behalf to slay this dragon. And he says, well, I'll do that for you, but if I do this, you're going to have to, make me king among you, because none of you are going to do this. And according to the tablets, they agree to this. He goes, he slays the beast. This is where we get the version of he slays it in half, uses the head to form the heavens, the body to form the earth, and the manifested existence, therefore fragmenting existence for a physical reality, rather than a purely like ethereal or spiritual one. And this story is the basis of so many other, I don't want to say myths, but so many other ways of interpreting our creation ever since, from the universe as a dragon, or the earth as a dragon, or slaying the dragon to show supremacy. These things all are very metaphorical. There's a lot of chronological, looking at those actual tablets, we do it academically, there's a lot of reasons why, even if we assume the history of the Anunnaki to be correct, there's a lot of reasons why this event, this dragon slaying or war in heaven as it's related to, did not take place that way. It has to do with actually the politics of the Anunnaki and their lifespan. But more importantly, it created a religious fragmentation that had never existed before. Prior to that, pre-Babylonian times, you have this very simplistic, end the light, just things are the way they are. We're, created to serve gods. Now the gods have, whatever they need, and we're just kind of left to ourselves with these kings in place that they did for us. In Babylon, you have the first alteration of that and separation, where rather than the pantheon being observed the way it had been kind of peacefully for so long, now you have Marduk appearing as the king of the gods. And, a lot of things, it's easy to, take that and think of, well, these people are being dishonest, or this is deceitful, and so forth. There's a lot of things that came from that, that is why our world is the way it is today, for better or worse. But it's bringing the knowledge and the power and the mysticism and access to spirituality down to the people. And this is something that was unheard of before. Before, people would go to the temples, and the priests were the only ones that could kind of petition the Anunnaki on their behalf, and the priests would bring offerings and prayers to the temple, where that deity was either assumed to preside or would frequently visit, and therefore a statue representation was left in its stead. But by the time of the Babylonians, you have, for the first time, a magical tradition among the people. You have people being able to conduct rituals on their own to petition the gods using basically Marduk's usurpation of power. And so you have a new vision of the pantheon. They're known sometimes as the sevens, related to the seven main stages or gates of like the main ziggurat in Babylon. There's a different way of perceiving the world than there was before. And what that, of course, opens the door for is further fragmentations from this. And so, if it can be done once, it can be done again. And so for thousands of years since, we've seen evolving traditions and spiritualities and ways of viewing things, which each one in and of themselves it seems to validate itself because it uses a semantic and a vocabulary to its own system, and then it makes sense. But, all humanity and all civilization in that respect has a singular unifying source that it evolved from and branched out on that tree from. And I guess in the time frame that, we have here on Earth and in, what we're given, it's just made the most sense to me to go back to that. And so I don't really want to say that verbatim I'm reconstructing or I'm personally adopting a revival of the Babylonian or Anunnaki religion as it once was, but rather reconstructing what it was and reevaluating what we believe, what I believe, what anyone can perceive about their reality, their beliefs, their own take on religion, for lack of a better word. Right. I try to avoid the religion topic. We started the group in 2008 officially as Mardukite Ministries, and unfortunately the use of, we use the Ankh and a lot of, we talk about the religion of the Babylonians and Sumerians a lot. It kind of makes it appear that I can't, separate between, a religion or a science or a mysticism or whatever, because they're all the same, they're just different words. Religion seems to just denote, it raises a lot of flags with people. So I try to steer clear of that, but I think it does validate, what people believe about their own, or what they can have a better understanding of about their own perception of religion. Unfortunately, even just adopting the term ministries, you mentioned, of course, ancient aliens theory, and this is something that's become, increased its popularity because of the recent History Channel show. And, yes. What actually kept me from being involved with that show was the adoption of, for example, the term ministries. They felt that, that I run an alien cult, and that, we're not actually intellectual in this at all or pursuing it academically, that we're just these religious fanatics that are like, let's worship aliens. And I'm just like, wow, apparently I have not relayed my message clearly then, because everybody else seems to get it. I don't think that the producer of the show really took a deeper look at what I was doing. I think on the surface it just seemed like maybe that's what it was. And unfortunately, maybe that's what a lot of, it makes me stop to think, is that not what other people may also be assuming and preventing them from looking into the work that we're doing. We started publishing our materials not because, we wanted to, make a whole bunch of books, but because we felt it necessary to begin cataloging this as time went on and making it accessible. And originally they weren't available to the public at all. For the first couple years, this was all stuff that if you weren't pretty intimately involved, you didn't really know that we were doing it. And it's since expanded considerably, but even in that, you mentioned when we were taking the question that there's like 20, 30 books. It's important when people do go to look at those that they pay careful attention to the actual descriptions of the work, because a lot of times what we would do is during the course of a year there would be several manifestos that came out as they were developed, which could be used to work with more easily. So we would produce them, we would put them out there, that people could use them in the rest of their research. When enough of that had been culminated, we put out anthologies so that it would be not only more economical in a single volume, but it was prestigious for the people that were working on it to see this kind of stuff come into manifestation. So of the 30 titles, there's probably maybe 15, 16 actual individual books that I have written over the course of the years. A lot of them have been put together to make anthologies, which compose a lot of the other ones. So I want to make sure when people see that they're not just so overwhelmed by, the amount of work that we've done.
Right.
In answering that too, though, I'm just now, it should be probably available in a week or so. We're actually answering a call that many people have put out to produce a monthly periodical, a magazine that's dedicated to this stuff, that not only helps bring out the new information and findings much more easily, but breaks down, what's become volumes and volumes and volumes of information into kind of a synthesis that people can absorb a little easier. Also, of course, with our economic age, it seems like it's difficult to sometimes, always go out and get all of these books. Whereas, incrementing it in a monthly form, it'll really help bring it to people, more accessibly than we have even before. And that's kind of what a division of our group is about, which runs the publishing company, is really focusing. It started with, cuneiform tablets. It started with focusing on the birth of language. Our emphasis has just kind of remained with that, interpreting the tablets, translating them, and then, putting them out in a literary form. I've done the YouTube, I try to lecture, and of course, radio shows like yours, but it really goes back to writing, and it goes back to, the books, and sometimes that's a difficult thing for people to accept, because it's easier, the Judeo-Christian tradition isn't so much about that, because you have a few that, are with the books and with the teachings, and then there's enough people that can relay it. Our parents give it to us, and we go to Sunday school and so forth. But in this day and age, if you want to get to the next step as it stands right now, it requires a little bit of initiative, just because it's not so commonplace, and it isn't so present yet, in our world. It's changing. I mean, more people are becoming apt to this every day, but still, like I say, it's going to require that. So yeah, in addition to the other books, I believe Amazon has agreed to carry the magazine as well. So that will kind of help, like I say, break it down in an economical and kind of concise way, rather than having to dig into huge books all the time, too. We're trying to just hit everything, every which way where we can actually relay it and make it make sense.
Right.
So.
Now, is your site going to have a membership to it so that it can have, say, like maybe forums or something where people can join and discuss?
There is a forum, and there is a link. In addition to the site you mentioned with the WP after the slashes, we currently pay to have that site. We pay for the domain Necrogate.com. We also have our library at Mardukite.com, so it's easy to just type them in and get there, even though that is the actual URLs of the pages themselves. But there is a forum. It does require someone to contact us for some of the obvious reasons. I mean, the work we do is not, of course, necessarily popular among everybody, and to avoid a lot of stuff, it requires us someone to contact us from that page to join. But there's a link to it from there. As far as membership, we're not really about titles and fees and keeping track of where people live and, all of that kind of stuff. We do have people that participate with us, and we call them members, but there aren't any fees or titles, really connected too much with that. We do offer, for people who are interested, we do offer a correspondence course, and, we have our certificates for that. But even with that, we let that kind of open to people's discernment as to, where would they want to take that. Because there are many people that work with us that if you were to ask them their religion, they would say Mardukite. So, I mean, it is changing how a good chunk of a growing segment of population, we look at the charts of the distribution, we look at the charts of the web traffic, it's growing exponentially at like a Fibonacci rate. So this is a good thing. It's showing that the world's still evolving and, not so fixed in kind of our understanding of things that we've been given, that we're not able to at least take a gander. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to adopt everything wholeheartedly, but to at least open up to new possibilities, because otherwise you're not going to see them.
That is true.
Yeah. So we're trying to just, that's what our organization, my work, pretty much the last 5-6 years of my writing has all been about. And there aren't a lot of people doing this, which I guess it's helpful for me. But as far as the kind of actual dedication going into it, about this time last year, we of course lost Zechariah Sitchin. There's other figures who are also coming of age and so forth. So we have a new generation coming in that is going to be looking and seeking and asking questions, and we want to make sure that it's not they're not left abandoned, and that we're not just ushering in this new age of technological development and all these possibilities on a material level and leaving all these other things behind, that we can actually evolve in wholeness, and that's what the new age and this paradigm shift and everything, that's what it really should be about, is evolving in wholeness and really reaching that point of unity. So.
Alrighty. Well, listen, we've been at this for almost an hour, Joshua, and you're very fascinating to listen to. But tonight is a school night, and I got to get up early and get John off to school. But I was going to suggest that it would be nice to have you come back on a Saturday, if at all possible, where we could devote a couple or so hours to it, since there ain't no school on Sunday.
That would be great. I'm sure we would be able to arrange that, no problem.
Fantastic. But before we do get out of here, I want to thank everybody for coming and lending your ear to this here, participating. Whether you call in or not, or ask questions or not, just listening is a form of participating. I want to encourage you to tell all your friends about the show and bring them over. Make sure you share the link and tell them about Joshua and his website. And let me repeat that web address one more time to make sure y'all don't forget it. And I'll put it also in the chat room, and I'll put it in there again, since we've been some chatting going on in there, and it's been scrolled up. But it's www.necrogate.com/P. I also want to invite everybody to come back this Saturday, as I'm going to be having Anthony Sanchez, the author of UFO Highway, on, and we're going to talk about his book, his whistleblower from Dulce, and the interview that he had with him, and you're going to have some new information out there. Also, if you folks are looking for a place where y'all can go and share information without a lot of the drama you get in a lot of places, stop by and see my friends at United Paranormal International. They're pretty good people over there, and they try to keep the drama down there and have a safe haven where everybody can feel free to share their views. And also, before we get out of here, I wanted to ask, one more thing. For those listening away from my site, if you want to join chat, sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter is free. Chat's free. Sign up for the site's free. It's just to keep out spam bots. But the URL is www.paranormalpalace.com. Stop on by, sign up for free, go into your profile, highlight the box that you want the newsletter, and submit it, and we'll be right in business. If you have any trouble, use the feedback form on the site to get a hold of me, and I'll be more than happy to help you out with that. And Josh, I wanted to ask you if you had any final last thoughts you wanted to share with everybody before we got out of here.
I would just say that I hope that everyone has a blessed holiday season, regardless of what religion, since religion seems to be the popular topic tonight. It's just that's really what it should come back to is, and like I said, unification and wholeness. Excuse me. It's really hard to get crunched into the whole religion factor, and so my probably really what all this work and all my efforts boils down to is that people can just live happier, healthier lives and get along together. So, if everyone who listens to this could just focus on doing that, then I'd be happy because, I gotta mingle with you guys at the grocery store and on the street. So everybody just needs to, get along.
And one more thing, for all of those that couldn't make it to the show live tonight, all of my shows are archived right here on the site. Look in the navigation menu on your left, and they're new archives right up there close to the top, right where it says home. It's going to say about the host, old archives that I had from when I was at Blog Talk Radio. And the shows I'm doing now are into the new archives. You can visit me at my YouTube channel, Mr. Paranormal, and I'll be putting these over there. And they will be put in video format. I will take my guest picture, my picture, and at least one of his book covers, and I'll have them rotating to the video while the interview's going on, so you have something there to look at. I want to thank you, and I want to apologize to you, Joshua, because earlier I went to hit that mute button to cough, and it was a pretty bad cough, and I hit the volume button instead of the mute button, and I coughed right in your ear, and I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. We can't sweat the little things. No, I think regardless of all the little stuff, I think the message gets out there, and I think that I think this is a very good a good experience. I hope the listeners have been at least further enlightened on some things, and I would love to do this again. It was a pleasure doing this with you.
Okay, Doc. Well, I'll be in touch with you about that there, and I'll also be sending you the links as soon as I get through putting the videos together and getting them posted.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, well, you have a good night. Now, listeners, y'all have a good night. Don't forget to refer your friends over here, and have a blessed holiday season. I'll be back this Saturday, and save me some turkey, everybody. Good night.